Good morning, everybody. Welcome in. Get settled in here if you aren't already. We're glad to have a good-sized Bible class. We're going to be looking at filling some big shoes this morning. It's been about probably 7 or 8 years ago that, at least, that someone told me about my dad, who, of course, was still living at the time. They said, you're going to have some big shoes to fill walking in your dad's. I wasn't entirely sure how to take it. I know what was meant by it, but I just kind of looked at him and I said, well, I guess it works out all right for me, because I said, I'm not trying to walk in anyone else's shoes. I'm just trying to walk in my own. I don't know how you look at things like that. The man is the same in ministry. The mission is the same. The message is the same, but they're different people with different skill sets and different, more specified callings in life. And, that's kind of the way I look at it. I'm not trying to walk in Dad's shoes or brother's shoes, or for that matter, the Apostle Paul's shoes. I'm just trying to walk in my own shoes and my own skill set and my own opportunities that God has given me in life, hopefully, to glorify Him. But I appreciate the sentiment, and because the man is the same, the mission is the same, the message is the same, you might look at it from the sense of they're the same shoes, it's just different people who walk in them at different periods of time. And if you want to look at things in that way in 2 Kings chapter 2, which is where we're going to be today, we have some big shoes that have to be filled. We're entering into this era of Mr. Elisha in Old Testament work, but in order to do that, we have to transition out of the era of another. Who have we had as the great prophet of God for many decades by this point? Elijah. Do you ever struggle with getting these mixed up? Not so much in like who they are maybe, but maybe who did this one and who did that one, because their names are so similar. Elijah and Elisha. Well, it helps me, if it does you, to think alphabetical. I'll do that a lot of times with kids in a family. I'm trying to remember the 3 kids, the 4 kids, the 5 kids, some cases the 6 kids. And I'm so grateful if they go in alphabetical order. Our mom and dad named us 4 kids, and unfortunately they don't go in this order, but we are the ABCD children. All of us start with that letter, but not in the same order. Well, it's nice if they do. And if you want to look at it in that light, Elijah, J, of course, comes before S in the alphabet, and he's the predecessor, the one who is in alphabetical order. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 2, and there's a transition that Elijah needs to make before Elisha can really emerge as the main prophet on the Lord's stage. So verse 1 of 2 Kings 2. And it came to pass, when the Lord was about to take up Elijah, the predecessor, into heaven by a whirlwind. Hold on a sec let's go ahead and read the end of the verse. That Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And we'll talk about locations in a moment. But for now, the Lord was about to take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind. Okay, what stands out to you about that as being odd? Anything? Okay, very good. There's no reference to his dying or that he would die. Good, Justin. Anything else stand out to you? And it's not right and wrong. There's several things I think here that are like, well, that's different. Joe? Okay, good. So there are shades of Jesus you might see in this. Great, Roy. What else do you see, Joe? Right. Yeah. Great thoughts and great questions. I appreciate the terminology you bring up, and we'll get to the questions within. So Hades, you mentioned. In the Old Testament, you'll see some as Sheol. Sheol, it's the equivalent of Hades in the New Testament. So you said Hades is like a waiting place? Got some music going on. What is this? the green room. Good. Waiting to get drafted? Yeah, there you go. Or that one also. All right, so that's what we have in Hades. What Hades means is the unseen realm, or the underworld is what it is. You have the world, the underworld, and you also have the above world, right? So here's where we live in the world. And in the underworld, that's Hades. And what's going there? Who is going to those places in Hades? Good. All right, so here's what we have, and we're not going to read this just for time's sake, but in Luke 16, I know we can spend the whole class on this, but just to identify here, in Luke 16, in Hades, there are two places that are found there. There's one that's mentioned in torment in Hades. That's a lot like the eternal hell. In Greek, that's Gehenna. That's not Hades. Those are two different concepts. At times there will be people intending to give a real insult, and they'll tell someone to go to Hades. It's not quite as bad as what they mean. I think that's not equivocal to hell, okay? That's the place where everyone goes when he or she dies. What part of us goes there? Now, it mentions in Luke 16 that you have a guy who goes to Hades. He's in torments. And then he looks across in the same location, and he sees someone who's in a blissful scenario. In Abraham's bosom, Jesus said to the thief on the cross when he says, Lord, we know that interaction between the two. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he says, assuredly I did say today, you will be with me where? Paradise. He does not say heaven. Those are two different words in the original language. In fact, John chapter 1, verse 18 states very clearly, no person has seen God at any time in this life, before this life, after this life. No one at any time has seen God, with one exception. What person? He who descended from heaven saw him before he lived in the flesh. Might have very well seen him while he lived in the flesh. The mountain of transfiguration, that could have happened. But we certainly know that afterward he sees him also, but in his what? Flesh. He sees him. So Hades is the realm of departed spirits, who you really are, your soul, we often state it. That's where everyone goes when he or she dies. And you're going to go to one or two places. I'll go to one or two places whenever I die. There's a good place. It's called paradise. It's a lot like heaven. It is not heaven. Heaven is a place where God dwells. No one has seen God at any time, including the departed spirits. It's not time for that yet. So we'll go to one place, that of torment or that of reward. Okay, now I want to point this out before we move on. Turn to Acts chapter 2. Acts 2, and then we'll get going with this. I don't want to get bogged down, but at the same time, this is such a unique occurrence in the Bible. I want to take just a few moments to appreciate this. Yes, sir. Very good. Excellent. I want you to, if you don't care, hang on to that, Shane. Very good. For those who might not have heard, he said, didn't Enoch go to heaven? Great. Okay, so Acts chapter 2. This has to do with Jesus and of course, whenever he departed the scene. But listen to this in verse 29, Acts 2, Peter preaching this great sermon. Brothers, I may say to you with confidence about the patriarch David that he has both died and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. By the way, we're talking about the rich man and Lazarus, even though we didn't identify them in Luke 16. It's mentioned that they die, and in the case of the rich man in particular, he's buried, but he is somewhere else. There's a separation that's taken place. Who we really are goes to the underworld, or to Hades, Hebrew Sheol, our spirits. Our bodies remain behind, and that's why it's called death. Death isn't you stop existing. That's not what death means. Death only means separation. And if you're ever curious, why is it called the second death when people are cast into hell? Jesus says the worm does not die, the fire is not quenched, the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. You don't cease to exist in hell. That's not what it means as the second death. Death simply means a separation. Why is it called the second death? The first one is called death because there's a separation of who we really are, our spirits, from our bodies. Now, in the case of hell, the spirits and the bodies have been reunited, Jesus says, Matthew 10:28, and by God have been cast into hell, both spirit and body. But if they're reunited, why is that called a separation? There you go, 2 Thessalonians 1, forever separated from the glory of God and from the brilliance, all the wonders that go along with His presence. So that's why it's called a death. Death doesn't mean you stop existing. Never means that in the Bible. It means there's a separation of some kind that's taken place. Okay, so Acts 2, there's a separation that has taken place even with our great, we're going to discuss today in the sermon hour, high priest, Jesus. The separation is with His Spirit. Remember, He says, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Okay, and the Spirit goes into God's control. Where, though? In paradise or Hades, not in heaven, where God is found. It's just it enters into His control, and His body goes into the ground. But after 3 days, His body comes up from the ground. How is that possible? I know there's the easy answer of, well, God can do all things. And that's true, but He has a process by which He makes that happen. What animates our bodies? The Spirit. So, just using some common sense and some logic, how was Jesus' body animated again? Spirit came back from the underworld into the world, okay, entered into His body, and eventually, where is He headed? Above the world, right? In heaven. So Hades is the place for spirits only. Bodies don't go to Hades. But as far as human beings go, heaven is not the place of spirits only. Heaven's the place of what? Bodies and spirits reunited. Does that make sense? All right, look at this in Acts 2, verse 29. Brothers, I may say to you with confidence about the patriarch David that he is both dead and buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Being therefore a prophet, knowing that God had sworn an oath to him, that he would set up one of his descendants on this throne, he foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to, you might have in your translation, this is the ESV, that he was not abandoned to, or yours might be that he was not left in Hades. Where did he go when he died? Who he really is, his spirit. To Hades, and in particular, the really nice place, the place of paradise, that's not heaven, but it's like heaven. But his spirit was not left there. After 3 days, where did his spirit go? It went from the underworld back up to the world, and it reunited with his body. And that's how, verse 31, the resurrection took place. Nor did his flesh see corruption. This Jesus God raised up, and of that we are all witnesses. Being therefore, understood by this point, exalted to the right hand of God. Where does God live? In heaven. So Jesus being exalted to the right hand of God, where is he? Look down in verse 34. For David did not ascend into the heavens. Uh-oh, that sounds scary. That means he's lost and he's in hell? We have no reason to believe that from Scripture. He's one of the great heroes of the Bible. Yet he has not gone into heaven. Why? John 1:18. No one has done that. No one has seen God at any time, whether prior to life in this world, life during this world, or life after this world. Nobody, save for one, Jesus the Christ. David did not ascend into heavens, but he himself said, the Lord, as in God, said to my Lord, to his Son, Jesus, sit at my right hand. Where's that found? In heaven. Do you see what makes Jesus unique? So, the short of it is this. Hades is the place where all departed spirits go in what's under the world, the underworld. It's a place of spirits only. No bodies are found there. Bodies are deposited in this world. But there's a time coming when, and you can read about that in 1 Thessalonians 4, those who are in the safety of Jesus, those who have been saved, will come with him, and they will reunite with their bodies. They'll be raised And then it mentions we shall go to be with the Lord forever. Where does he live? In heaven. We haven't gotten to see that yet. Our dearly departed. I mentioned my father coming into this class. I love my father dearly. Can't wait to see him again and spend forever with him. But as much as I love my dad and as excited as I am for him for what he's being rewarded with right now, he's not in heaven. Nobody is in heaven who lived in this place except for one, Jesus. He's in, I believe, Hades or paradise, which is a great place, much better than this land. We wouldn't want to leave that once we get there to come back to this place, but I assure you we will want to leave it for our spirits to be reunited, to get the complete victory over sin and death, just like Jesus in the body. And then we get to go to the place called heaven, which is not a place human-wise for spirits only. It's a place for spirits and bodies that have been reunited with one another. Yes, ma'am. Tartarus, very good. Yes. Right. Very good. Tartarus, yeah, you're exactly right. And I agree with you. I think the main confusion, Andrea, comes in with arguably a mistranslation 400 years ago. Okay? And the staple of an English language, British English, but the staple of our English language and the crown gem of translations, what are we, a little over 400 years ago now, it translates Acts, the 2nd chapter, that Jesus' soul was not left in hell. It's not Gehenna. That's not the term that's found. It's not Tartarus either. Only one time that's found, and that's in 2 Peter 2, Tartarus. Correct, yeah, absolutely. Hell is not Hades, no. So you have Hades, the underworld, the place of spirits, reward, paradise, and then Tartarus. Thank you for bringing that out. Okay, that's the term there. Gehenna is the word for hell in Greek. Totally, the Bible never mentions Jesus going to Gehenna for 3 days. He doesn't go to spend time in hell. No. Yes, I believe that's from where all of that came when you hear Jesus spent 3 days in hell and suffered for our sins. Now, I don't mean this flippantly or in inappropriate language, but he did truly experience hell for us, but it was on earth where he experienced hell, if you will, the punishments of hell, but it wasn't once his spirit left his body. Very good. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I love this subject. I could spend the whole class period, I guarantee you. But I've said all of that, though, to get back to our text and say this. It's so unique. I feel that it's vital we identify this in verse 1, 2 Kings 2. It came to pass when the Lord was about to take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind. That doesn't happen. It simply does not happen. But it's kind of like Jesus and what happens with him. Now, granted, it's different because Jesus suffers, he dies, spirit, body separated, spirit, body 3 days later reunite, and then in a cloud, he goes up to heaven. But this one doesn't mention anything, Shane, about his death. Nothing about it. Let's put that off to the side and table that for just a while. 1 Kings chapter 19. You care to go back there with me for just a moment? 1 Kings 19. So we've been told about Elijah and Elisha. This is not an introduction to him. We've already had this guy, but we just haven't really discussed Elisha a whole lot because the spotlight has continued to be on Elijah. 1 Kings 19, 21. And he, that is Elisha, returned from following him. That's Elijah. So Elisha returns from following Elijah and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. It's unclear when exactly this time frame transpires. Not all of this is written in chronological order. If it is, okay, which is possible from the terminology, it almost sounds like it might be. If it is, it's been many years of expiration of time from 1 Kings 19 to where we are in 2 Kings 2. Ahab is still king, and after him is going to be Ahaziah, we know. Ahaziah reigns for 2 years following the death of his father Ahab, and that's what we just recently studied in chapter 1. I know we looked ahead to chapter 8 because of the descendants of Jezebel, and it kind of fits into that topical section, but now we're going back to where we were. So it's at least 2-3 years. From the way it would sound from the text, I think you're more likely looking at a span of probably about a decade at least, maybe a couple of decades. Point being this, Elisha has been running around with Elijah when Elijah called him for some time. And now we're starting to find out why. This prophet is going to exit the scene, Elijah, and there's going to need to be a replacement. Kind of like with the 12 apostles. Judas, sad story. He exits. So what's recognized as a need? Matthias, we need a replacement apostle. We need a replacement great prophet of the Lord, and Elisha is going to serve as that. Now, we did encounter Gilgal. Let's look at our map here really quickly to establish where we are. You might recall when the Israelites originally from the Exodus, they come up on the east side of the Jordan River Valley, and they cross over the Jordan River. You have Gilgal, where the area of where the stones, the 12 memorial stones, of course, are set up. All right, so it's that area where there's some rich history for the Israelites. They go to this place on the southern end of the Jordan River before it empties into the Dead Sea. Verse 2, then Elijah, that's the one who's been on the scene for a long time, said to Elisha, the understudy, many years, maybe 10, 20 years, quite a while, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to Bethel. Okay, so this is helpful for us. In verse 1, we're given information that you would think maybe not everyone in the world knows, that Elijah is about to be taken up by God into heaven. And it appears that he knows that. And Elijah says to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me on to Bethel. Look up here on the screen. That's going to be from Gilgal. Bethel's about 25 miles, just about due west and a little bit north. He says, I want you to stay here. I have a 25-mile trip I'm going to take, and you just hang back, and I'm going to go do my own thing. You know, this is the last day he's going to be spending on earth. And it's like he wants some time of solitude, a man and his thoughts. Is that interesting to you? It stands out to me. I think it's hard for us to say unless we're in those shoes. Usually people who are on their way out want to be around one another and spend as much time with their loved ones as they can. But if you'll recall about Elijah's life, he's not really an ordinary human being. What kind of personality does Elijah seem to have? He's a man of the wilderness, and he's okay. Yeah, before I leave the house, I'm like, okay, where's my belt? And I need this pair of Hey Dudes in this color. And we're going through all these specifics that we need and everything just so. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's not afraid to stand up. And when he's the only one, outnumbered 450 to 1, he doesn't care, right? And maybe a little more accurately, 850 to 1, taking the prophets of Asher into consideration also. Yeah. And what was the personality of John the Baptist? Right. These are wild men. They don't really care about their attire. They just walk around in something that covers up and keeps them modest, and they're different guys. And look, that's okay. We often think about ministers. We'll have to have this outgoing, bubbly personality, and a lot of times you'll see that in a minister, but it doesn't have to be that way. God makes different people different ways, and that's part of what I said about I really don't believe any minister should be striving to walk in another minister's shoes. God made you in your own uniqueness, your own talents, and your own interests, and outside of doing His will, and the man's the same, the mission's the same, and the message is the same. There are going to be some peculiarities about us, and that's the case with Elijah. Most of us in our last day, we would be trying to soak up as much time with people around us as we could, and this guy's like, for us, I'm going to drive to Springfield. Once you hang back, I'm going to take this trip by myself. It's a man and his thoughts, like he's like to live life as much as possible. But Elisha says to him, as the Lord lives, this places him under an oath. And he says, I will not have it. and he's not being disrespectful, he's being very loving about this. As the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. And I'm going to guess that Elisha got in as much information on that 25-mile trip as he possibly could. Several years ago, and a few different times excuse me. Excuse me. I've had the chance to spend with Lonnie when he came down here, and I felt like that, Heath, on the fishing trips. He probably got tired of me asking questions and, listening to, but I just tried as an understudy just to soak up as much information as I could in a very compressed period. I think Elisha wants to probably do this, and there's a reason I believe he wants to. Verse 3, now the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel, and the sons of the prophets are those who are being trained, by the way, to be prophets. Okay, that was pretty common. They're at Bethel. So there's what we would call a preaching or a seminary school today at Bethel, where these other prophets are being trained. They're being taught the will of the Lord and how to expound that through communication to others. They came out to Elisha, that's the understudy, and said to him, do you know that the Lord will take away your master, that's Elijah, from over you today? Apparently this isn't some big secret. People know that Elijah is about to leave the earth today. And so God in this miraculous age, I say miraculous, like feeding information from heaven directly into people's minds, have done this into his understudy spokesman even, or maybe those who have been teaching them and the prophets over them, and then they passed it on to them. He says, do you not know that Elijah is going to leave the earth today? And he said, yes, I know. This isn't news to Elisha either. He knows this day. I'm going to guess God's probably communicated this already to him. But, once again, this is a fascinating command that he gives to these kids. I don't know if they're kids, but younger anyway. He says, keep silent. Yes, I know that. Shut up, what he says. Why do you think he would tell them that? I could see a couple of possibilities. Tony? Very good. There's a time to speak, and there's a time not to speak, and a time just to listen. And it may even be for their own good also. Stop talking about what's going to happen that you can't stop, and start listening and soaking in things before he does leave. But certainly on his end, let me get in what I can. Good, Tony. That makes a lot of sense. Anything else? That connects with me. We're going to find out how close he is to this guy. And just think about it. When the closest people to you in this life have left or will leave the earth, is that something you just want to openly talk about, and especially right at the time it's going on? So it could be that he's entirely heartbroken that he doesn't want to talk about this. I think those are a couple of possibilities. Anything else? Verse 4, then Elijah said to him, Elisha, stay here, please. Second time he receives this instruction. For the Lord has sent me on to Jericho. So he's going to leave from Bethel, and he's going to go back east. Kind of interesting that he doesn't just go from Gilgal to Jericho and over to Bethel. And I think there's a reason for that. But he goes from Gilgal, about 25 miles northwest, to Bethel, and he's going to go about due east another 15 miles, but back in the direction from which he came, to the city of Jericho. But he said, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. This is not disrespect. It's a loving oath that he makes to him. I'm glued to you all the way to the end. And especially as an understudy, they probably spent 1 to 2 decades together, and he wants to be there for his closest friend, undoubtedly. So they came to Jericho. Now the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho. So what do we have set up at Jericho, like at Bethel? This is an Old Testament preaching or seminary school. So there's another one that's found. There could have been many others scattered throughout Israel also. That's a great thing for the people of God. The sons of the prophets who were at Jericho came to Elisha and said to him, do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today? So he answered, yes, I know. Shut up. Leave me alone about this. And it could be that he just wants to soak in every word, wants them to do so. Stop talking and get back to listening. Or it might be it's just too painful for him even to discuss this matter. Verse 6, then Elijah said to him, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to the Jordan. Now notice back on our map, that's the direction to the east. And to get there, you're probably looking at maybe about 8 miles then to get to where the Jordan River is. But he said, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So the two of them went on. And 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood facing them at a distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. Now Elijah took his mantle, that's his cloak, or kind of like his coat, maybe better like a shawl, but we'd probably think of it like a coat. So he takes this outer garment, the coat, and he rolls it up, and he hits the water with it. And when he did it, the water was divided this way and that. Store away that terminology, so that the two of them crossed over on dry ground. And so it was when they had crossed over that Elijah, that's the older, said to his understudy, Elisha, ask, what may I do for you before I am taken away from you? This is a whole lot like what Solomon experienced, but God speaking that time. 1 Kings 3, hey, I appreciate your service, what you're doing for me, great job. Here's a blank check from heaven. You fill it in and go cash it, whatever it is. But it's different, and this is a human being. So he's going to be somewhat limited, even though he's the great prophet and works all these miracles. He's still very limited compared to the limitless power of the Almighty. But this is a terrific gesture, and you can see that this probably real introvert in Elijah, he deeply cares about his understudy, Elisha. And maybe in this somewhat rare showing of affection, he says, hey, before I go ask anything, here's the blank check. If I have the funds in my account, I will cash it for you, and I'll do whatever you request. And kind of like Solomon. For Solomon, I think it's pretty simple. I need wisdom to direct your people. And what an awesome request that Elisha makes. He says, I need something like your spirit. I want to be like you, to be upon me. Now we're going to see it. He's not fully walking in Elisha's shoes. He has his own peculiarities. He seems to be much more of an extrovert. Okay, so there's some different things, but as far as the man, the mission, the message is all the same. And he says, I got to do what you've been doing. In that sense, I have to be walking in your shoes. And so I want your spirit upon me, but not just your spirit. How much of it? Double. You know what Jesus will say about John the Baptist later? I'm going to tell you right now, there's no greater prophet than John the Baptist who's ever lived. But he also doesn't say there's no lesser. I don't know by God's infinite standard where Elijah ranks, but I would have to think if John the Baptist outside of the Lord himself is number one as a prophet, surely Elijah would be 1A. I mean, those guys have to be just about neck and neck with one another. Among the greatest prophets to have ever lived. And Elisha says, if I can have anything I want, everything that you were, I want to be twice that. I like the response of Elijah. So he said, I'm sure this is in great humility. You've asked a hard thing. It's a lot of man, a lot of prophet right here, But you want double that. Woo! Nevertheless, I can't grant that to you. He's a powerful prophet, but he can't do this. He says, nevertheless, if you see me when I am taken up from you, it shall be so for you, what you've requested. But if not, it shall not be so. Meaning I don't have the capability of doing this, but I'm going to put this in God's hands and let him decide if he will grant your request or not. But God has apparently communicated this to me. If you see me depart from this place and vanish in some very special way, then you know it's been granted to your request. If you don't see it, then sorry, I tried. I did what I could. Verse 11, then it happened as they continued on and talked that suddenly a chariot of fire appeared with horses of fire and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Shane, who's the only other person to have done this? Enoch. Genesis 5, Hebrews 11, it's stated about Enoch that he was not found, that he did not see death. There wasn't a separation. Now, we need to understand, Hebrews 9:27 is appointed for men to die once. That's the rule. And after this, the judgment. But we also know for every rule that God gives, what? I before E. That's the rule. Except, there's always an exception, after C. The rule is this: nobody has been to heaven, no one has seen God, because everyone has to experience death, and at death the spirit goes to the underworld. That's the rule. I'm convinced, just like every other rule in existence, there is an exception or two that's found to that. And we do know this: Enoch did not die. His spirit, that means, was never separated from his body. And I believe the logical conclusion means that Enoch is not in Hades. We do know in the case of Elijah, he never dies, meaning his spirit never separates from his body. And therefore, since Hades is a place of spirits only, I don't believe that he's found in that place. But we're told, the Scripture says, and this is unique, you won't find this for other people, but that he went to heaven where God dwells. I believe personally that he sees God on a regular basis, even though the rule is no one has seen God at any time. We know there's an exception in Jesus, and I believe there are two other exceptions in the Bible that are found: Enoch and Elijah. Thank you for patiently waiting, Andrea. Was it? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Roy. Okay. Good. Yeah, good thought. Okay. So about the chariot of fire, and also there are horses of fire, I believe they communicate a couple of things. One, I believe that the chariot certainly is a symbol of war. It's typically used in war. I think it has something to do with heaven's army in this case. But also, of course, the horsemen, the same thing. But the chariot's kind of unique, though, in that it carries things. I guess you could argue the horses do the same thing. But symbols of war or army, defense, and the other thing is they carry. And I believe those are the concepts here. You have the army of heaven coming to one on the earth, giving him a very special escort. They're carrying him to the next realm. I see that as, and I appreciate the question, because actually it's going to tie, if you don't mind, if we go into verse 12. Okay, you go ahead. You go ahead on that one. Right. You also make the case that he's seen him in the burning bush episode whenever he's called. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it seems that. Right. You're right. But then you also have the statements that he spoke to God face to face. Right. That's true. So, and by the way, that's the place where it's stated in Exodus 33. He says, "No man shall see me and live." So that's why we can't do it. And it would seem to me probably we would go into cardiac arrest from the brilliance of what we would perceive. But regardless of what it is, why, who, how, and all that kind of stuff, Exodus 33 is stated, "No one shall see me and live." Yet he says, "I think a lot of you, Moses, and so I'm going to cover you up in the cleft of the rock, go hide in that crack over there." And he says, "I'll remove my hand when I'm walking away, and you can see me from the back," is what he says. Yet, in the passage, is correlated not with actually having seen God. And I believe it goes back to when Moses is called, and there's this fire, and it's the Lord, well, the angel of the Lord, then just called the Lord himself. It's a manifestation of God. You know, Revelation 1, we're going to have that in our sermon a little bit later. And John sees one like the Son of Man, and he's clothed in all this stuff, the golden bands and the brass feet, and go on down through the list. And when he says, "When I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. I lost all strength." Yet nobody's seen God at any time, or he wouldn't have survived if that were the case. But what he did see was a manifestation of the brilliance of God. So yeah, that's a good thing you brought up. And I'm like you, I've kicked that around quite a bit, Roy. Putting it all together for me is that we can't see the fullness, the rawness of God's presence and survive the experience in this form. We would die. However, there are a number of people who see different manifestations of God. And for instance, of course, God is spirit. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. So let's go to Jonathan, and then we have John. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What's called a theophany, or a showing of God, but not like God in his purest form. Right. I believe so. That's what seems to make sense to me. John. Good. Hadn't thought about that. Yeah, could be a symbolism there, and also maybe an implication that it took some force. you know, you have when Mary Magdalene sees Jesus. What's the resurrected Jesus? What's her reaction? Oh man, and do you blame her? I think her mindset is, I will never let go of you until Jesus gives a command that has to be obeyed. And what is it? Do not cling to me. Let go of me. I got to go on. I got to do these other things. And you can see that from Elisha. It could be that he's going to hang on. No, I won't ever let you go. It might take some force for that to happen. And I like what you mentioned about the symbolism of death, too. Could make some sense. Good. Okay, any others before we finish through? Oh, okay, 3 more. Let's go. William? Good. And I appreciate you saying that. I was going to mention that I forgot to just a moment ago to follow up the comment. That, for instance, of course, God is spirit, right? But yet he has a back, a face in Exodus 33, and hands. Yeah, what he's doing is translating things to us in concepts that make sense to us. But in his purest form, this is pre-Jesus on the earth, right? In his purest form, God doesn't have a face and human face, back, hands, those things like we do, but it's putting it into human terms. And I think what he makes visible is also the case to him, putting it in a human way that makes sense, that wouldn't kill him. Yeah, being an actual presence. All right, let's go Karen and then Tony. That's fascinating. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. Thank you. I'm gonna chew on that more over this next week. Thank you. Let's do that. Great point, Karen. Thank you. Okay, Tony? Yeah, very good. Well expressed, Tony. Okay, thank you for that. So we'll finish the discussion on this in verse 12 the next time we get together. I intended to get through the end of the chapter, but we'll do that for sure. And just keep the memory verse, if you will, 14. We almost made it to it. But appreciate all that good discussion. Thank you.